Okay, in this video, we're going to go through some central ideas from Hobbes that I want to drive home. If you've fully understood what I've said already in the other videos, or you fully understood Hobbes when you read him, these points will already be clear, but this is to reiterate important points that people sometimes miss. So first, according to Hobbes, justice is identical with abiding by contracts, where remember when we talk about contracts, we only mean real contracts, which are contracts that are uh, likely to be enforced. So a contract like I agree to something with you is kind of meaningless according to Hobbes. It's only when there's likely to be punishment from one of us from an empowered official source, a government, that a contract is meaningful. So justice or doing doing what you ought or being morally good is keeping the contracts, is following the law. So that's all there is to morality. All justice, all morality, all these kind of norms that you might think of stem from contracts that are made for selfish reasons. Remember, I'm making these contracts as a way to get out of the war of all against all. That's all there is to morality. There's nothing more. To be clear, some moral claims are true and other moral claims are false. So if you're living in a society where the law says wear a hat when you go outside, then it's true in that society that you should wear a hat when you go outside. That is a moral truth. If you're living in a society where the law doesn't say you should wear a hat when you go outside, or let's say it says you shouldn't wear a hat when you go outside, then it's true in that society that you shouldn't wear a hat when you go outside. Law and morality are identical according to Hobbes. Okay. All right. When can you break contracts in a state? In a well-functioning state, there are cases in which you should break contracts. In particular, you should break a contract that will harm you to uphold, so long as the harm of upholding it is greater than or equal to the harm of breaking it. So what do I mean by that? Well, suppose you have some police here and they're about to arrest you. And if they arrest you, your punishment is going to be a $50 fine and 2 weeks in prison. In that case, Hobbes would say you should uphold the contract that you've made with the state not to violate this law and accept the punishment if you do violate the law, because it's in your interest. Why do I say it's in your interest? Because 2 weeks in prison and a $50 fine is not that big of a deal. It's certainly not even remotely close to as big of a danger to you as returning to the war of all against all would be. And every time you violate the law, you create some, and especially if you don't accept your punishment, you create some small risk of returning to the war of all against all. And you should never accept that risk unless the alternative is just as bad. So suppose you're going to be imprisoned for life or even executed. If you're going to be imprisoned for life or executed, then you're better off returning to the war of all against all. So in that kind of case, you shouldn't accept your punishment. You shouldn't uphold your contract. And really, if you can see this clearly, then you understand the role of morality and contracts for Hobbes. It's all stemming from your own self-interest. The only reason to get into the moral game, the only reason to accept government, the only reason to give up some of the right of nature is because it's in your self-interest to do so. So the minute it no longer is in your self-interest to do so, you should opt out. Okay. There's some quotes from Hobbes. If you want to pause it, you can read the quotes. I'll leave them here for a second to make it easier to pause. So there's one, there's the other. Rebellion. When is it appropriate to rebel against a bad government? Well, Hobbes thinks that it's almost never appropriate. It's only appropriate if the government is so bad that you'd prefer to take your chances in the war of all against all. Why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. So one reason is you might not succeed. You might try and rebel and fail, and that would be pretty bad for you. Moreover, even if you do succeed and you install some sort of new government, and I should say, failing can be bad in two very different ways. One, you might get punished by the leader for trying to rebel. Maybe the punishment's really severe. The other way in which it can be bad is you can succeed in overthrowing the current government, but fail to establish a new one. So now you're back in the war of all against all. So that's one reason why it's bad to rebel, because you can sort of fail to get what you want. The other reason why it can be bad is even if you do succeed in overthrowing the current government and installing a new leader, you've now put that new leader at risk. Why? Because in the very act of succeeding in installing a new leader and overthrowing the previous government, you've taught other people that you can overthrow the leader and install a new government. So you've made them more likely to engage in this kind of rebellious behavior. And of course, that's a danger to you as a member of the new government. So when is it appropriate to rebel? Only when your life is so bad that you'd be like, hey, I might as well take my chances in the war of all against all. So if the leader is doing such a bad job, such an incredibly bad job, that life is still nasty, brutish, and short, that there still isn't commerce, there still isn't farming, it's just awful, then you might as well rebel and change the leader because the risk of reverting to the war of all against all isn't such a serious risk because you're pretty close to that already. Okay, so now let's look at a sort of summary of where we are. We start off with this question, why should we have some government rather than none at all? And Hobbes answers a kind of what's called a contract theory, a social contract theory, in response to this question. He says, government enforces social contracts. So you and I agree not to kill each other, and the government enforces that contract. And that's why we should have government, because it allows us to make these contracts, and these contracts allow us to get out of the war of all against all, but more generally, they allow us to flourish in ways that we wouldn't be able to flourish in without them. A lot of people accept that kind of answer. So a lot of people accept that even if they don't think there would be a war of all against all in the state of nature, that is, even if they don't think that without government, everybody would beat each other's throats nonstop, a lot of people think that really the ultimate basis for government, why we should have some government rather than none, is because government can play the important role of enforcing social contracts, and that can allow people to flourish in ways that they otherwise wouldn't. Now, in response to which kind of government should we have, Hobbes answers that we should have a totalitarian dictatorship with one all-powerful dictator. And that's not such a common answer anymore. That is, lots and lots of people, both in the United States and around the world, say, no, I don't think that we should have totalitarian dictatorships. And that raises the question, why should we pay any attention to Hobbes' answer to the second question? If his answer to the first question is still very influential, it makes sense to pay attention to it. But if not many people accept his answer to the second question, why pay attention to that? And the answer is many people are heavily influenced by Hobbes' answer to the second question in many ways. And correspondingly, many aspects of Hobbes' answer to the second question still are very influential. And in order to illustrate this, in the next video, we'll look at ways in which Hobbes' answer to that second question, what kind of government should we have, are influential in the United States. Now, to be very clear, the claim here is not that the United States is anything in the neighborhood of a totalitarian dictatorship, nor is it nor is the claim that it ever has been anything in the neighborhood of a totalitarian dictatorship. The claim is rather that there are aspects of Hobbes' argument for the conclusion that we should have a totalitarian dictatorship that are still very influential and that influence our decisions and our institutions. And we'll look at some of those influences next time.